Okay, awesome. Thank you everybody for joining. Just for a reminder, this is being recorded. So if you ask a question or anything, your voice will be recorded. I do not think your picture or anything will be, but if it is, I will cover it up in my editing process. Unless you don't mind, then you can just let me know. Okay, so let's get started. So this is, I think, posture and alignment is something that we don't really learn the details about growing up and even as an adult, and we're told to stand up straight. And there's a lot of details to it. And the brain can play tricks on you too. And what feels straight may not actually be straight. It's kind of crazy what you might see if you start really looking at people's posture after you attend today. So, okay, so posture and alignment, what's the difference? Posture, you have choice. Posture is your choice in how you hold your body. And that choice may be very conscious or it may be very subconscious, and it can be both. And alignment is how one part of your body stacks up relative to another part of your body. For instance, your clavicle in relation to your sternum would be alignment, how your body is aligned. So with your posture, you have a lot of choice in how you hold yourself up against gravity in both sitting and in standing. You also have posture choices in sleep and rest, which can play into alignment, but we're not going to focus on that today. That's a whole nother topic. Okay, so why are posture and body alignment so important? The first thing I want you to think about is you don't have to spend your life in perfect posture in order to be healthy, but you should be as comfortable in perfect posture as you are in any other posture that you might choose. And that can be a difficult concept for people to understand. But anyway, and that applies to both standing and sitting postures. Your choice of postures influence your alignment. So if I choose consciously or subconsciously to have a very forward rounded posture, that influences the angle of my collarbone. And right now it's influencing it in a very temporary way. But if I choose this posture most of the day and most of the evening, when I'm sitting on the couch, this temporary alignment of my collarbone may become permanent. So those choices influence the permanence of your alignment. I think that's very important. Okay, continual misalignment of a bony aspect of your body. We're going to get into a self-assessment here shortly. Continual misalignment of a bony aspect of your body, and we'll take the collarbone as an example again, is going to result in shortening of certain muscles and lengthening of other muscles. And that shortening and lengthening is part of the process of this becoming permanent. Okay. Then what also happens, there's the muscular changes that surround that area, but then you start to have changes in the fascia. So the fascia is that web of connective tissue in the body. So the fascia knows it's one of its big jobs in your body is to protect you. So if now this joint is misaligned because this joint there's a joint here, there's a joint here, there's one back here, so there's a lot going on in the shoulder, and we use our arms a lot, right? So if everything's out of alignment, now the muscles are some are too short, some are too long. This joint is not going to be able to function in the way that it is designed to function. It's supposed to be back here when we lift and we reach. When it's up here and we want to lift and reach, the fascia has to kick in, tighten up, provide more support to that area so that it can get the job done for you. It can protect you while you get life done. So, and that then continues into a spiral of more and more and more tightening. So this ongoing misalignment can continue to sort of spiral out of control as we age against gravity. But then what happens is something much bigger. Our body is designed to function as a whole. And when we have continual misalignment of the body, that affects every other body system. The muscular system can't function normally. For example, if my muscles are too long back here because my shoulders are so forward, they can't function normally when I want to do something. So it affects the muscular system, the skeletal system, the tightening around the joints. The bones can't work together as they're supposed to. Things become difficult and comfortable. The nervous system, the tightening of the fascia. There's a whole another discussion we could have on the tension of the fascia interacting with the nervous system and its effect on pain. Also affects the firing of the connection of the fascia to the nervous system is what tells us where our body is. Like I know exactly where my hand is, even though I can't see it. That's proprioception. The tension in the fascial system decreases our ability, which that proprioceptive aspect then affects our coordination. The lymphatic system, if people are they're having chronic swelling in certain parts of their body, or maybe swelling after exercise, which I've seen in multiple clients lately, it's kind of wild. That tightening in the body can affect the flow of the lymphatic fluid, which is the waste products that need to get out of the tissues and out of the body. So chronic swelling, circulatory system, not being able to get blood flow deep into the tissues. And what I often hear from people after we do releases or they do stretching is, wow, it feels like blood flow is just coming into my tissues. So that misalignment, that tension can restrict blood flow. And ultimately what's healing our bodies is getting that good, healthy blood into the tissues to keep them healthy. And then also reproductive health, digestive health, immune health, respiratory function. So much your alignment and posture affects so much of the rest of your body. So the big question is, what can we do about it? Well, first of all, I just saw a new client yesterday, and when I was showing him how to get into his best posture, he's like, that doesn't feel right. Or it's really hard to do that. So when your body is tight and your fascia is tight, it makes pulling your body into good alignment uncomfortable or difficult. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel comfortable. And that's part of what I see as my job as a fascial therapist, is helping you feel more comfortable in good posture. So old beliefs also can lead to poor posture. So beliefs like, I see in a lot of women, especially who are tall or developed sooner than their peers, they tend to want to make themselves small. Or people who have depression or other issues want to make themselves small. So old beliefs can feed into your posture, and that can be changed. Cultural beliefs. A lot of older women that I work with, they want to tuck their tailbones and they stand like this. And they were taught that that is the ladylike way to stand. And if I tell them to untuck and find their low back curve, they feel like they are pushing their butt way out, and it's inappropriate for them to do that. So cultural beliefs can affect our posture as well. Often the hardest thing to overcome in postural change is the brain, and the brain's recognition or adaptation to this is normal. This is a normal posture. And when you ask somebody to change, they have a neurological reaction to that, and it can be very powerful and very, very difficult to overcome. So oftentimes the only thing I ask people to work on after the first visit is changing their posture patterns. And then I'll give them some other exercises, or I might give them one or two that might make it easier for them to achieve better posture. And because if we don't work on the posture, it's just going to prolong the healing process and invite more problems down the road. Okay, so practicing posture, I said earlier, I think you don't have to be in perfect posture all the time, but if you have poor posture and you're trying to make a change, then you should get yourself in perfect posture all the time until it feels normal to you. Only then should it be okay for you to like start achieving other postures. But even then, you need to know that I have to go back to this on a regular basis. I can't just go back to living life in that forward piece. If there's an opportunity to improve your posture, take a good posture, standing in line, sitting in the car, washing your dishes, if you've got an opportunity to work on it, because that is what will make the change. It's not going to be, I'm going to do 3 sets of 10 of this once a day. It's got to be an all the time understanding of what that is and how you could achieve it and stay there. Okay, setting up your environment to support good posture. If you're somebody who sits at a desk a lot or in a chair, setting up that environment, being very intentional and purposeful in your environment and how that's contributing or not to poor posture. And a quick example of that would be, I will frequently have people who have maybe one hip that's higher than the other, and I'll ask them, and they're desk sitters, when you get up out of your chair, are you always turning in one direction? And oftentimes the answer is yes. Yeah, I always turn this way. Well, then that movement pattern is going to tighten here and not so much here. And pretty soon they've got this tighter muscle and a higher hip and some low back pain. So paying attention to the environment and how you balance it out. And that's a whole nother ergonomic discussion we could have. Okay, and choosing exercise that supports good posture and variety of movement, and thinking about your choices and then how you're acting out those choices, because you can be somebody who likes to walk, but if you're walking forward like this, then that is not contributing to your good posture. Walking can be really good for you, or walking can be not so good for you, depending on the movement patterns and the alignment that it's reinforcing. Down the line, let's see. Once you've practiced your posture so much that that great posture feels normal to you, then you can start really incorporating a big variety of postures. Because once that feels normal, then I think the most important thing for the body is variety. So choosing a variety of postures is coming back to that home base of a good posture. And then to start thinking about moving from good posture. And an example of that might be if you typically have a forward leaning posture and you're going to get something out of your cupboard, well, bring it back here first and then get something out of the cupboard. And you might find that you've got to take a little step closer to get something out of the cupboard. But thinking about that postural stability before you do the reaching, the lifting, the bending, respecting the plumb line, and we'll talk more about what that is here shortly. Okay. Now I will be sending you all a assessment, a checklist that you can use. We'll go through it today together, and then I will send it to you if you want to do it on your own time. What I'd like you to do, if you are sitting, come up to a standing position. And when you start to think about your posture, what I'd like you to do is just kind of shake everything out and then close your eyes. Let your arms fall naturally wherever they want to fall. Let your feet land where your feet land. The first thing I want you to pay attention to is, where do you feel the weight in your feet? Try not to shift around. Try to just bring your attention there. Is it spread all throughout your feet? Is it mostly in the balls of your feet? Can you feel your toes pressing into the ground? Or do you feel it mostly in the heels of your feet and lightly on the front of your feet? Just take a moment and play around with that. And then also look down and see, what direction are your feet pointing? Are your toes pointing? Change this just a little. Okay, so what should be happening, or what best posture is, and again, you've got many, many, many options. Trying to adjust this just, you've got many options with your body, right? But we're talking about what is best posture. So our feet are designed to feel most of the weight. And when I say most, I mean 75% or better of the weight through the heel. If you imagine a picture of a skeletal picture of the foot, you've got a great big heel bone and lots of little bones in front of that. And there's actually 33 joints in the front of each foot. And those joints are not meant to take your weight all the time. They can and they will, but when they have to take your weight all the time, your feet and your whole body are going to tighten up a lot. So the first thing I would like you to think about is bringing that weight into your heel. And that's probably one of the most frequent cues I give, that you hear me give in yoga if you've come to my yoga class. Okay. When I look at a new client, I can often see where they're holding the weight in their feet. And if someone's got the weight in the front of their feet, they're often leaning very much forward, like you see me doing now. If it's in the heel, you've got to come back. And I mentioned the plumb line earlier. When I'm evaluating somebody's posture and I'm looking at them from the side, I start at the ankle and I draw an imaginary line straight up. And I start at the ankle and I want to see the knee joint, the hip joint, the shoulder joint, and the ear fall in that plumb line. And I see everything's forward from the plumb line, just the head is forward from the plumb line, the hips come forward from the plumb line, and then the shoulders come back. People choose a wide variety of positions. So just note where yours are now. And the sheet I'll send you later, actually you can do an assessment on yourself and get a numerical value for that. So that's the first thing I want you to think about, weight in the heels. And that is often the number one piece of homework I give people, is get your weight in your heels. Now, we talked earlier too about the neurological aspect of this. A lot of times when I say bring the weight in the heels, people are like, whoa, I'm going to fall backwards. And that is because they're so adapted to this. I also find people who are high energy, fast paced people are always leaning forward, whether it's sitting or whether it's standing. Try, when we're talking about that plumb line, if you have a seam in your pants, you can look down and see if that seam is vertical or if it's coming forward, if it's at an angle. Another little trick you can use is grab a belt or a belt, a scarf, a string, and hold that right at your hip joint. Find the actual joint. So I'll have people stand in front of a mirror and hold a belt or a strap and then back their hip up until that strap falls in line with the ankle. This is a really cool trick I learned from Katie Bowman when I went to one of her workshops. And then you can see. And so what I often see is they're like, whoa, I really have to back my hip up. And then I'm like, now get your shoulder up over the hip. Or sometimes they're like putting one hip back, but not the other. So noticing what you're doing as you're trying to get things stacked up. Okay, let's stick with the feet for a little bit. So another cue I give in yoga is get your feet underneath your hip bones. I find that people who are unstable or weak will often take a wide stance, or people who want to make themselves small often take a very small stance. But the most common foot misalignment I see is the feet out to the side, pointing out to the sides. Either one or both is turned out. And often that's correlates with a hip issue that they have, but not necessarily. So if your feet are pointing out to the side, point your toes forward. And if that feels uncomfortable to you, if it feels like your knees are really falling in towards one another, then your knees are probably turned as well. Okay, so let's keep going up the chain. So those will be 3 things we've talked about so far: weight in the heels, toes pointing forward, and aligned underneath your hip bones. So you can feel your hip bones and look down. And women often overestimate the width of their hips as well. So feel the bones and go underneath there. Okay, the next is the knee joint. And this might be, to assess that, you really need to be able to see the backs of your knees. So you can have somebody, you can align your feet and have somebody take a picture of the backs of your knees. It's hard to tell from the front of your knees. You can maybe, but sometimes if the knees are really turned, the knee cap will adapt. So another way to see this is if you bend your knees, do they tend to want to fall together and not point forward? In my experience, I see far more women that have turned knees than I see men. And that, again, I believe is a cultural issue, cultural thing, because we're taught to keep our knees together, to cross our legs when we're sitting. We're also wider in our hips, and a lot of chairs are either really cushy. So as soon as you fall into a cushy chair, that rotates it internally rotates your hips. Car seats, lots of different kind of seats are kind of scooped, and that's disadvantage for the wider your hips are, the more you're going to internally rotate, and you're going to get tight through here and longer through here. And that just perpetuates that turned knee and lots of problems. So if you think you have your knees are turned in, and you can look at this deeper later, then practice by using the muscles in your legs to turn your knees forward. And if you try that now, almost if you're trying to turn them, rotate them in that vertical plane. And you might notice when you do that, when your knees come into pointing straight forward, your arches come up off of the ground. And just another aside, often when people have their arches are fallen and you put an arch support in there, it pushes the knees back into better alignment too, because the arch comes up. So that is a very passive way to fix the problem. The better way would be to get the rest of your body into alignment and not rely on something passive, because then you're not always going to have that lift in there. You might want to be barefoot sometimes. You should be barefoot sometimes. Okay, let's keep going up the chain. The hips. The first thing with the hips is you want to see that they're level. And you probably need to look in a mirror, and it might help to use some kind of a belt or a strap and hold on the top of both of your hips to see if they're level or not. I frequently hear that people say, oh, I've been told I have one leg shorter than the other. It's very, very rare to have an anatomical shortness, but you could have one that appears to be shorter because there might be, as I talked about before with that rotation, some tightness in your abdominal area, your QL, your low back that pulls one hip up a little bit. So if you have a hip that's high, then working on the stretching you'd want to do is through that side primarily in order to level out your hips. Another very common rotation or issue in hips is rotation, especially on the right side. And that is often because we use our right foot to do driving, the gas and the brake. So we're constantly pulling that hip forward. So I often see a little rotation forward, a little twist. Sometimes it's a rotation in this direction, and those things those are all soft tissue and things that can be improved with myofascial work and the right kind of stretching. So things to think about with your hips. And then of course, getting them stacked up over that joint over the ankles. Okay, let's keep going up. Let's talk about the arms. Look down and see where your arms fall when they're completely relaxed and your weight's in your heels. A lot of times if people are forward in their feet, their arms fall really far forward too. But I see a lot of people who are, when they stand up straight, their arms come very far forward in front of their body, and I can see the backs of their hands. The proper alignment, if the tension is appropriate and the alignment of the joints of the shoulders and the tension of the arms is appropriate, the middle finger should fall to the seam of the pants. Should very comfortably just fall right there. And just see how that feels for you to pull it back there. Is it effortful to have to pull your hands into that position? If it's effortful for you, then you may have quite a bit of tension across your chest. You could have tension in your traps as well. That's pulling the arms forward. So arms, fingers, middle finger in line with the seam of the pants. Okay, let's talk about the rib cage. It's a common, if I tell somebody to stand up straight or pull their head back, what I often see is this action. It's like everything is stuck from the rib cage to the head and it's all rocking together. And they're pivoting on that joint where the lumbar switches into thoracic, or the curves change in the back. There's a pivot point there that they're often rocking on. So the rib cage should not stick out forward. The rib cage should actually, the front of the rib cage, if you spread out your fingers and your thumb touches the bottom of your rib cage and your fingers touch the top of your hips, they should fall in the same plane. If your ribs are sticking forward past your hip bones, they're too far. Bring them back in. I skipped over a really important part. So feel your rib cage down. I'm going to go back to the hips here in a second. So bring the rib cage down and see what that does to your head. And then try to keep the rib cage down and the head back. Because again, we're trying to get the ear over the shoulder, over the hips, over the knees, over the ankles. That might be something that you might practice at a wall as well. So keeping your rib cage down and then bringing your head back. So if you bring your head back, your ribs pop forward. You need to separate those two aspects, create more mobility through the neck and shoulders. Okay, let's go back to the hips for a second, because you can bring your hips back and still not be in the proper pelvic tilt. So pelvic tilt, this is anterior pelvic tilt, and this is a posterior pelvic tilt when the tailbone is really tucked. Anterior, posterior. Okay. And how do you know where neutral is? Where is the best for you? There's a couple anatomical ways to look at that. And just while it's popping into my head, I'm just going to show you guys. This is the book by Katy Bowman, Alignment Matters. All this information is coming, well, most of it is coming from her book. There's also a couple other really good back books and alignment books out there, but Katy's a biomechanist and she's quite amazing and fun to read. Okay, so the alignment points that she talks about, there's two. If you feel the bones in the top of your hip, okay, and then find your belly button and go straight down until you hit the top of your pubic bone. Those three bones should fall in the same plane. So if the bones in your hip are far forward and your pubic bone is back, you're sticking out too far and you're making your low back curve too deep. If your pubic bone sticks forward and your top of your hip bones are back, you're tucked under and you're tucking your tailbone under and your back is way too flat. So we want to find when our hips, our pelvis is in neutral, we're finding the most appropriate low back curve for us. Another way to think about that is the angle of the tailbone. So if you reach back and feel your tailbone, and imagine if you strapped a little flashlight on your tailbone. Bless you, Maddie. If the tailbone, or if your tailbone was tucked, your flashlight would probably point straight down. You'd probably shine the light straight down on the ground. If you're in the more appropriate pelvic tilt, the flashlight would probably point about a foot or two behind you. We want about a 35 degree angle of the tailbone. And that can vary a little bit in people, but those are a couple different alignment points that can help you know if you're in the right alignment. And imagine if you are really tucked, that opens up the back of your spine, making more opportunity for discs to bulge out. If you're more compressed here, you're compressing your organs, your diaphragm, your digestive system, probably affecting that quite a bit as well. As we talked about how alignment can affect all of our other systems. Okay, so we've covered feet, knees, hips, ribs. Another way to think about the ribs is the sternum, the breastbone, and if you can tap that. That bone should be perpendicular to the ground, or it should be very vertical. And if it is at an angle, then either your ribs are too flared or your shoulders are too far forward. So thinking about that bone being very vertical. Okay. Further up the shoulders, I'm going to come closer. Let's go to the collarbones, the clavicles. So if you feel they start at the sternum, connect there, and then follow them out to the side. The clavicle should be pretty parallel to the ground or very horizontal. Might have a little bit of an angle. They can have about a 10 degree angle to them, would still be considered fairly normal. But if you see someone or in yourself where the collarbones are really angled in this way, that is not the design of your skeletal system. It is an alignment issue that's likely been caused by postural choices over the years. And in order for me to get that kind of alignment, I need to really tighten up through my traps. So if I see angled collarbones, then I'm working through this area in people and through their chest and neck as well. So check that out on yourself. You can feel it from one to the other. In some of the in-person classes I do, we'll put stickers along there so we can see where that actually goes. So that's an important piece as well. And then the head. So it's easier to see if you put glasses on. So the glasses should be, this part of the glass should be level. I see when I ask people to stand up straight, they'll do something like this, and then they really stick their chin out. The chin should be down so that the space between the eye and it's actually the base of the skull can be your reference point as well. Should be level across there, and then ear over the shoulder. And I know mine isn't quite perfect, so. Okay, so I'm going to double check that I covered everything. I didn't talk about the ankle bones. If you reach down and feel your bones in your ankles, the one on the inside or the medial side should be slightly higher than the one on the outside. And oftentimes what will happen is if their knees are rotated and their ankles are weak, their feet are falling in, and the inside can be actually lower or level with the one on the outside. And if you bring the knees forward and the arches up, then you're going to see those ankles align better as well. And thinking about how much time we spend on our feet, our ankles, and when they're out of alignment, that's really going to tighten up our fascial system. And the fascial system, if it's tight in one place, it can have an effect on the entire body. Okay. Okay, I think I've got all the alignment points. I am going to snap a quick picture of who is all here so I can send it out to you. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? That's a lot of information.
Amy, I have a question.
Yes.
So in thinking about translating alignment to static versus dynamic versus standing versus sitting, can you give us any thoughts about, like, if we're starting to pay more attention to our alignment, what might we also think about in terms of just walking, or if we're going to be sitting somewhere, just to get into the practice of being more attuned to our body?
Excellent question. I would expect nothing less, Dr. Holm. So, okay. So I teach a class called Move Better, Age Better for Metro, and it's going to be going online again here soon. And the first week, the assignment is get the weight in your heels. And I generally teach it to an older population. And it's a big aha experience that's where their weight belongs. They're like, why didn't anybody tell me this? How did I get to be 70 years old and I didn't know this? So the assignment is get your weight in your heels, but it's also a very dynamic assignment too. So I asked them to stand up, and you guys could try this with me right now. Just stand up and then identify something that you can reach for, or pick something off the ground, or pretend you're going to pick something off the ground. And stop midway through and notice what's happening in your feet. If you see or you're feeling that the weight has come forward in your feet, then that's the first assignment. Is as soon as you go to reach for something, put your weight in your heels and then reach. So try that now. Put your weight in your heels and then reach. Can you feel the difference in your body? Then try it the other way again. Feel how much tension is in your legs, your back, and then try it with the weight in the heels. And see how much tension is, how the tension is different, especially in your back. That goes to that whole, back to the plumb line. Let's go back to the plumb line. So if I'm going to reach forward, that plumb line helps define our center of gravity. So if I'm going to reach forward for something, a lot of my body has to come forward from the plumb line. And if I've got my weight in the heels and I keep it there, something has to go behind the plumb line. So if I want to pick this chair up, for example, I could probably pick it up from here, but all the weight would come forward. If I get close to it and stick my tush out, I could keep my weight in my heels, and that protects the back a lot. It also minimizes the amount of tension in your body. You have to have some to do the job. So their job for the whole week is, until we get together in our next class, is every time they reach for a book is my weight in my heels. Every time they empty the dishwasher is my weight in my heels. Every time I'm cooking dinner or doing the dishes is my weight in the heels. So it's an activity they can do all day long. And it's really fun because they're like, oh, you were in my head all week long. And but it became, in 1 week, it became very routine for them because they focused on it so much. So that would be a huge, opening your car door, getting in and out of your car, transferring your body, weight in your heels. And it's not that you're not going to have to go on your toes or the front of your feet in order to do daily tasks, but are you doing it too much because it's just your routine, it's just your habit? Because nobody told you otherwise. Let's talk about sitting. So taking the concepts of standing and taking them into a seated position. So we talked about the appropriate position of the hips, using those alignment points. We're going to take that same alignment into a sitting position. So oftentimes you see when people sit, then the hips tuck under. And if I took this position into standing, this is what it would look like. So thinking about that same alignment of the pelvis in the sitting position. And again, it doesn't mean you have to sit this way all the time. You should be comfortable and be able to sit here and get work done for a reasonable amount of time. And then sometimes this is okay too. Sometimes this is okay too. When we're thinking about the plumb line, if you're sitting, your plumb line then starts at your hip. And so your shoulder and your ear need to be above that. Now, sometimes using the back of a chair can actually be really good for your body because it allows more of your body to relax and more blood to flow if you're going to be in a static position for a long period of time. But making sure that you've got some kind of lumbar support here so you're not going into that posterior pelvic tilt. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, those are great, like just initial things to think about, like to take from this class to the next step. So
yes, something that you can be doing immediately. Immediately, and thinking about through the rest of your week. A few quick things to think about in terms of, well, what are some common misalignments? Like I said, with women, the knees are extremely common. So inner thigh stretches are very important. And that's what we're going to do in the stretching class at 3. If anybody has time to come back for that one. But taking a wide stance, getting your weight in your heels. I like to use a chair because I can hold it a lot longer. And then we do this one in yoga quite a bit. But you don't have to be in a yoga class to do it. You can do it while you're watching TV. So stretching this space and holding it, and if it's been a long standing alignment issue for you, there's probably fascia involved. If there's fascia involved, that means you have to stretch with the fascia in mind. And that means gentle and hold it. And sometimes holding it might mean 2, 3, 4 minutes until it really starts to let go. If this position is too hard for you to hold, then you can do stretches for that area on the ground too, where you don't have to hold so much of your body up against gravity. You can also use the therapy balls, which I was using mine. I traveled with them, so they're not where they belong. So there's lots of different ways to stretch the inner thighs. There's a video on my YouTube page on my website as well. Other common areas for people are the tightness across the chest, which holds the arms forward. Thinking about any time you get up from doing some work that is forward, whether it's making dinner, working on the computer, open up, squeeze the shoulder blades together and relax them and just open up and go back as far as you can until you feel that tension starting, and hold there and just walk to the bathroom or wherever you're headed next with your arms back here to counter that position. The last thing I'll say, will give you opportunity for questions more if you have them, is some of the best research out there when they've studied populations that are more indigenous populations, they sit more than we sit, but they sit very differently. And the other thing that they do that we generally don't do is they have bodies that can tolerate it, because when they're not sitting, they're very active and doing lots of variety of movements. And so their bodies can tolerate those sitting positions better. So the best advice I would give people if they are someone that has to sit a lot is to create a really healthy body that can tolerate those positions. You guys that come to my natural movement class, it's creating a body that is resilient and that can tolerate lots of different kinds of positions. And I talk about that in class a lot. And then the other day I dropped something. It fell off the side of my bed, which is very close to the wall, and I couldn't reach down and get it like by laying on the bed. I had to actually lay on my stomach and reach sideways underneath the bed in order to get this thing that I dropped. So, and I'm thinking, oh, this is a good example of when you have to use your body in a really strange way to do something, where otherwise I may have had to wait till my grandkids came over and crawled under there and got it for me. But anyway, are there any other questions? Or we'll wrap up so we have a little break between this and the natural movement class.
Yes, Amy.
Yes.
Could you send a link to the class you're gonna be teaching at Metro? Because I'd like to pass that on to someone.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. Okay. Cool. Anything else? Okay, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it very much.